Indian people were becoming part of the, should we say, movements for peace, movements for civil rights in our own way. And so there was a reaction to that in both the urban Indian communities and also on the reservation, because people began to organize AIM chapters for local issues, not just about Wesley Badheart Bull getting killed in Custer, but there are issues locally about the Bureau of Indian Affairs misuse of our lease monies, which is still a question today. There was a question about housing, inadequate housing, that a number of our people were still without electricity and plumbing. And so people began to question in the areas of healthcare and education, why weren't any of these monies being utilized properly, because we had just been part of the OEO and the war on poverty of Lyndon Johnson. So there was federal funds coming into the reservation to a certain extent, but they were being misused, and so the people began to challenge the tribal council. They began to challenge the BIA, the police force on the reservation, about other issues of brutality amongst our own people. And so as people spoke up, and especially if they identified themselves with the American Indian movement, then there was retaliatory action taken. First of all, by the formal organization of a group later became known as the Goon Squad, who at one time proudly stated to the news media that Goon stood for Guardians of the Oglala Nation. And of course, everybody had a good laugh about that, but these were the people that addressed any, should we say, question, or any people that were so-called dissidents or organizing against the administration of the tribe at that time. And so the FBI, the BIA began to look into these issues and develop strategies together in their law enforcement policies. People were being harassed, kicked out of their house because they were perceived to be part of AIM, or people were being, should we say, brutalized if they were found out to be AIM and found in the wrong place of the reservation by the Bureau of Indian Affairs Police and or the FBI. And so this was a kind of reign of terror that was actually kind of began to take place on the reservation, because these goon squads were operating with impunity. There was like nowhere you could go, and so people started coming to ask AIM for help. And so many times we had to send various squads of security down to different parts of the reservation, not only Pine Ridge Reservation, but other reservations. We did caravans all over the upper Midwest at different times for different issues that concern our people. So this was a time of a lot of organizing. A lot of people were involved in addressing and questioning the way the government had administered even the funds that they have. For example, during this period of time, the budget of the Bureau of Indian Affairs was probably about $1.3 billion, while 80% of this, by the government's own study, that was called the American Indian Policy Review Commission, headed by Senator James Aberrest from our own state, documented the fact that the BIA's revenue of $1.3 billion in their budget was 80% of this budget was being used for administrative costs. So then you take the administrative cost, the 20% that's left, and they divide that between 12 area offices out in the field of the United States by region. So by the time this tax money get to the people, it was only a small crumb of what had originally began as appropriation by the United States government. So these are issues that began to come out in the government studies themselves that backed up the challenges that American Indian movement was making. So I wanted to give you an idea about how society, both Indian and non-Indian, began to look at the AIM many times as a threat politically, especially on the reservation, because people started to vote in a more organized fashion. More people started to turn out to vote. More people were running for office, and this continues today. And also on the state side, all of a sudden, they didn't have jurisdiction over AIM actions on the reservation. And they're trying to create this idea that AIM is a bunch of criminals running around threatening the public. And so they had a reaction in terms of the governor and other officials, state of South Dakota, of stopping more cars on the road to see if they're American Indian movement people, if they're carrying guns or explosives, or, they used a lot of different words when they would arrest Indian people in order to kind of stir up the public opinion against American Indian movement, to basically criminalize the movement, to say that we're not really representatives of the reservation, the elected officials, we're just outside agitators from the urban areas of America, and that we're basically all ex-convicts. When in fact, almost the total opposite was true, that AIM was made up of people from all walks of life, especially the grassroots people on the reservation, even in the urban areas. Well, we had people who were professionals as well. So the movement had a good cross-section of Indian America as our official members and supporters.